Hi everyone, my name's Jon Watkins and I'm the CEO of the Resilience Development Company. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you a very short, very simple and very easily applicable skill that will make a huge difference to you and potentially the people at home as well who really matter. And it's all based on this premise really, and that is, how do you typically respond to rising demands in the workplace? Because if you're like most people, we tend to respond to rising demands in the workplace by throwing more time and energy at that problem. However, that doesn't necessarily make us more productive, more effective. And it certainly doesn't help our emotional and mental well-being, or potentially those people at home. Because as human beings, we're not designed to focus for long periods of time. That's not how we work. We're not machines. We work in cycles. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a skill supported by a lot of science that hopefully will encourage you to do what we know we should be doing, and that is taking lots of longish breaks throughout the day. Let me explain, because I'm going to introduce you to something called the Ultradian Rhythm or Ultradian Rhythm. And there we go. Let me just throw it up on the screen right here for you. Now, the Ultradian Rhythm is a natural rhythm that every single person has. We all have it. And some of you might have heard of your circadian cycles or your REM cycles. Well, this is tied into all of those as well, called the Ultradian Rhythm. And although this plays a huge role in all of your cells, what I'm going to focus on is your brain. I'm going to relate it back to focus to start off with. But this is a fascinating, you go away and Google, it's absolutely fascinating how big a role this plays on your long-term health as well. But we're just going to focus on focus for now. Let me just get my pen up and running. And what we've got here is, look, we've got the start. Let's just call it point A. Point A, your brain starts to charge up. And it takes around 20 minutes for your brain to fully focus on what it's doing, which is really important when it comes to things like multitasking, for instance. But it takes about 20 minutes for you to fully focus. And at some point, you get to this point where your brain is at its absolute best. It's focused, it's purring away, off you go into whatever you're doing. It then, no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, we will naturally start to hit this trough right here. Your ultradian break is what it's called. Now, scientists will say that break occurs every 90 to 120 minutes. In reality, it totally depends on you. And for those of you that have young children, you'll absolutely know what I mean by there's no way it's 90 minutes. So constantly jumping between children, it's what, 30 minutes, 45 minutes max? If you had a really poor night's sleep, there's no way you can focus on that report for 90 minutes. It's more like 30 to 45. So it does depend on you. It depends on what task you're doing. But scientists generally will say the benchmark is 90 to 120 minutes, your brain will start to switch off. And the great thing about your brain is it will tell you it's doing that. It will give you warning signs. Yawning is a great one. That's a really obvious one. Other ones including thirst, potentially hunger. But the big ones I think most people really recognize outside of yawning is your focus. You'll start to lose your focus. So when you're reading that in-depth report and you have to reread that same sentence or same paragraph 3 or 4 times because it's simply not going in, or you're typing something out and you stop and you reread it, it doesn't make any sense and it's full of red little marks all over the computer. That is your brain telling you it's time to switch off and you've hit one of these ultradian breaks. Now, interestingly, again, going back to any parents we have in the room, everyone knows, children very, very demanding. That point as a parent, I've got 2 youngsters, where suddenly you're absolutely exhausted, you run into the kitchen, you get into the kitchen, you've finally got 30 seconds freedom, and you suddenly start to crave something. And that something tends to be a sugary thing. Well, if that sugary thing or even that smoke generally comes a little bit after your ultradian break should have been. So again, that can be a little bit of an indication that it's time to have a rest. But your brain will give you all of these natural signs and signals that it's time to take a break. And what it will start to do is it will start to power down. It'll start to power down so it can go again. Now, as I mentioned before, the way we tend to work and meet these rising demands is we switch on and we just go straight. Or that's what we think we do. It's not really possible to do that, as I said, because we work to these natural rhythms. What's more than likely to happen is you power up, you kind of miss your first ultradian break, you think you go again and whoomp, and eventually you start to start to really feel the impact of not having any of these ultradian breaks towards the end of the day. And, you know, this is sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon when you've got that nice, simple piece of work. It's going to take you 30 minutes. It takes you an hour. You just can't focus. You just can't seem to get your brain in gear. Or it's that moment where someone comes up to you, taps you on the shoulder, asks you a cup of tea, and you just explode at them in rage because your stress response has kicked in to get you through the day because you're exhausted mentally because you haven't taken enough breaks. The bit I really notice, and this really hits home for me, is this point. You know, when you get home, 4:30, 5 o'clock, when my children come in from nursery, my 4-year-old runs up to me and he's desperate to tell me all about his day at nursery. I'm just not there with him. I'm struggling. I'm desperately trying to be there with him. He wants me to play, create games with him, do interesting stuff. But I'm exhausted mentally because I haven't listened to my ultradian rhythm. I haven't taken those regular rest breaks throughout the day. So the point of these things is you take more breaks between 5 and 20 minutes. Probably should have mentioned that earlier, shouldn't I? 5 to 20 minutes is what science say you need to take in order to recharge so you can go again and hit your optimal level again, back round again, so you can go again. That's what they suggest that you need to do. For me, and you know, some of you might well be like me, it's about 10 minutes. Anything less than that, I don't really recover. I don't need anything longer than that. But again, it totally varies depending on you. And that doesn't mean you walk to the coffee and you think about work all the way there and you come all the way back thinking about work and it's 2 minutes. It means proper breaks. I've delivered a lot of training to a lot of different people in a lot of different roles in the NHS, in local government, stockbrokers, so on and so forth, police, armed forces. And some of those turn around to me and say, do you know what? There's absolutely no way we can take a break every 90 to 120 minutes for 20 minutes. And that's not what we try and do when we train people in some of these skills. Resilience, or what we show people, is all about what you can do and when you can do it. So although you're not going to be able to do this and listen to your body rhythm absolutely every single second of the day, how and when can you do it? That's what becomes important. And if that means during these rest periods, when you recognize you're losing focus on whatever it is you're doing, and some of those signs are coming forward and you can recognize them, go do something that's not as mentally taxing, I should say. Photocopying, for example. And what you'll find is that will aid and that will allow you to go again. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. Okay, so the ultradian rhythm, massively important in terms of how effective, how productive you are at work. You will get more done. That's the scary thing. It feels like you won't, but you will get more done. And you'll feel fresher. You'll have way more energy come the end of the day, probably to nurture things that are way more important to you in work, like friends, family, hobbies, things like that. So it's a simple skill. It is relatively difficult to do. We like to get people to think about not necessarily lots and lots of breaks throughout the day, but can you start to break your day down into 90-minute chunks? That's sort of a star version. If you can't do that, if that's difficult, it is back to take some breaks and make sure they're good 10-minute breaks and make sure they're regular throughout your day. Well, that's the ultradian rhythm. It's science, it's neuroscience, it's massively impactful, it's massively effective for those people that can really start to listen to their body and work in those 90, 120-minute chunks. Have a go at it. Let me know how it goes, and hopefully I'll see you again for another skill soon. Thanks very much.